Am I adulting good?
I just don't know what I'm doing. I can't breathe.
I feel so anxious.
This is what it's all about. I just don't know what I'm doing. I can't breathe.
This is what life's all about. I just don't know what I'm doing. Oh, what's going on?
I don't understand.
Welcome to the Am I Adulting Good podcast, where we talk about all things self-help and the reality behind trying to adult to our best ability in this world. We're your hosts, Brianna, Kriss,
And I'm Caroline Savransky.
and we are both in community mental health, so we've seen some pretty interesting things.
Deciding to take on the journey of self-betterment is daunting and hard. Let's make the mistakes together and share what does and does not work. Because hey, are any of us doing anything right? And if we are, how would we even know?
We will cover a variety of topics like the old self-sabotage, toxic relationships, finding yourself after a breakup, or perfectionism. Special guests will be invited for most episodes to share their experiences and wisdom.
This podcast is aimed at anyone and everyone who needs a little bit of help getting their shit together and wants some company in doing so. We're in it for the laughs, but if we can learn something on the way, then that's good too.
Am I adulting good?
Welcome to another episode of Am I Adulting Good? And this week we carry on from what we were talking about last week, which was about how to deal with a breakup. But this week we're going to be talking about how to communicate in a relationship.
God, don't we need help with that? I think it doesn't matter how well you are adulting. I think there is always room to learn more about communication in romantic relationships, friends, and family. So thank you so much for coming on board, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So today we have Sarah, who's a relationship coach and a meditation coach, and she runs Living a Brave Life. So thank you for joining us. And to begin, we always ask, what does adulting mean to you?
Adulting means to me, I think, just taking full responsibility, quite simply.
That's a pure, straight to the point answer.
Yeah, full
Good.
responsibility for all areas of one's life.
Couldn't agree more. And so who are you? What do you do? And how did you get into it?
Yeah, well, I am firstly someone who is fascinated by human connection and relationship dynamics. I live in Byron Bay. I've been here for a few years. I'm originally from Sydney. Previous to my current coaching and meditation teaching career, I was in the corporate world. I worked in financial services marketing for about 12 years, and I was feeling completely drained and lacking in purpose, and was asking the universe essentially, like, what more? What more is there? There must be more to it than this. And so I was really seeking something new. And feeling quite anxious and quite depressed and not really understanding how I'd gotten to where I was in my life. And I think that soul searching journey really led me down the path about 7 years ago onto coaching, psychology, and meditation.
Yeah, wow.
And I come from a family of psychologists and meditators.
In the blood.
Yep. So
Wow.
it's in the blood. But interestingly, I actually had a huge aversion to both psychology and meditation for the first 30 years of my life. As it happens, in childhood, we either want to become like our parents or we want to be nothing like them.
Isn't that funny? That you're just like, all of a sudden, damn it, you guys were right all this time. Living amongst that would have just given you such an innate knowledge and natural incline to understand these type of things, I guess, from observing how your parents behaved? Or is it something you felt you've developed within yourself separately from them?
Oh, I think it was quite separate, in fact, because I say that only because even though, I'm sort of like third generation from therapists, they didn't really talk about it so much. They weren't like philosophizing about the theories of psychology and attachment theory or whatever it was. And the same with Buddhism. They actually didn't really talk about it at all. So I didn't know. I knew my parents were meditating 2 hours a day in the back garden in this shed that my dad built. But I didn't understand that it was Buddhist, or I didn't really understand anything about it. And kind of the same with psychology. And so I really had to come up on both of those in my own time. And I think it was, there was obviously something cellular probably that has now sparked in me, like a fire that was, sort of probably simmering my entire life. And then for whatever reason, it was just ripe. The time was ripe. And then that
Blossomed.
Exactly. That spark has now become a flame. And then my absolute fascination and almost obsession with human dynamics, essentially.
Wow.
So you've chosen communication as part of your expertise. Why is communication in relationships so important?
Yeah, it's such a good question. Well, essentially in relationships, as we've all experienced, we can come up on blockages or issues. And one of the reasons why that is because often we're feeling something that we're not expressing. So we're having some kind of either a sensation in our body and we're having a reaction to that. And there's some kind of emotion. And then we're often not able to express it. And then it causes an issue in a relationship. And so communication is essentially one of the keys to releasing blockages or creating more openness, more expansion in a relationship, leading to more connection, more love, which is ultimately what we're all looking for in relationships. And that doesn't matter what kind of relationship that is, whether that's with an intimate partner, that's with our friends, even with colleagues. We're looking for more depth, more meaning, more connection. If it's an intimate partner, maybe more intimacy, more love. But we're always wanting something to be, really substantial from that relationship. And then we feel, oh yeah, this is a good relationship.
Yeah. It's amazing. In a lot of my relationships, I have worked so hard in learning how to communicate. And I often feel that taking out the emotion, trying to be logical about it, trying to express how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling that way without blaming anybody, but being, this is what is going on inside me. And I'm very well aware that whatever has happened has also been a trigger of my own, and it's brought up all this other stuff. So I really feel like I've developed a lot of my own techniques, but I find a lot of the problem comes when another person hasn't been able to either do the work or, has a very different communication style, and there's still not that flow there. And it's just really interesting because there are so many communication styles out there. And a lot of it is to do with perception and perspective of what's going on. So what do these different communication styles look like? What works? What doesn't work?
Yeah, well, there are certainly a lot of different ways to communicate our needs, express our feelings, ask for what we want. But I just wanted to circle back on something you were just saying there about, doing the best you can with all the knowledge and all the resources that you've got to understand, oh, I'm being triggered and I want to express my feelings. And what if the other person isn't at the same place? What if they haven't done as much work as I have? What if they don't have the same information that I have? And then there still can be this miscommunication, essentially.
Yeah. Discrepancy. Yeah.
Correct. Because I also see this as a huge issue. I see it a lot between women and men actually in relationships, particularly when the women feel like, they've maybe done a lot of personal development or they've coached with me and they say to me, oh, but my partner, he doesn't understand. He doesn't have the same communication style. He's more indirect. He comes across as maybe being a bit avoidant or a bit emotionally unavailable.
Something I've personally is just such a major trigger for me. I just lose my mind when this happens. Like specifically with a romantic partner, when you can tell something is wrong. It's written all over them, the body language, everything is changed, and you go, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" And they go, "I'm fine," and they just shut you down, and you can't continue having fun and acting like you don't know something is wrong. So, I mean, how would you approach someone who has just shut you down and 100% something's wrong?
Yeah. And that is such a great question. And it is such a common experience amongst so many. I think one of the best ways when communicating is always to start with how I feel. Because the tendency in relating is to make it about the other person. And
you did this, you did that.
Exactly.
You're not
You
treating
want
me
to
right.
essentially judge, blame, shame, and make it about them needing to make an adjustment or change in order for you to feel better. And where it actually starts, I believe anyway, in effective communication is to start with vulnerability, which is owning how one feels in the moment and starting from that place. So for example, if you sense that something's wrong with someone, your partner, whoever it is, and you want to understand, what's going on with this person, rather than going out there first to them to ask them, "Oh, what's going on with you?" Start with sharing about where you're at, being vulnerable first. Lead with that, which sounds like, "I'm feeling anxious right now because maybe it was something to do with the last communication, or maybe because I'm sensing or I feel some distance between us," or own what it is about what's going on that is your trigger, essentially. I feel X because of Y trigger. If you have the level of awareness, of course, to be able to do this in the moment. And then ask them with a level of curiosity rather than judgment. And you could also go with the next sentence rather, because Brene Brown, I love this. "And the story I'm making up about this is that you don't want to be with me anymore, that you're having," I'm making this up obviously, "that you're having second thoughts," or whatever the story is. Own the story, because there will be a story behind the feeling and the trigger. You will have experienced the emotion because of the trigger, which is what you want to communicate. And then you'll have made up a story about what that means, essentially. You'll overlay the meaning onto the feeling and the trigger. And that's what you really want to communicate to the other person, so that essentially you feel heard.
Yeah.
And then with a level of curiosity, you can then ask them, "Is that what's going on? Is that true?" You then give them the opportunity to respond. But if you don't own your own reactivity first, you actually don't give the other person the opportunity to respond fully, because they don't really understand what's going on for you. They probably just feel like you're trying to attack them.
Gosh, so many people I know, some have good communication styles, some have others. Mine is very much, if there's conflict, let's address it. Let's talk it out now. I'm ready. Are you ready? And then, some closest people around me, instead of that, they're like, "I need 3 to 4 days to pretend that nothing is wrong so I can process this, so I can understand myself. And then maybe we'll have a talk about it. Otherwise, it'll be brushed under the rug." Everyone is so different at the angle that they come out at. And it's so interesting in what you're saying, because that story that we seem to create for ourselves. And I think sometimes I get so frustrated when I'm like, I want to know if this story is true or not. Like, help me to get out of this space, because I do create that story so much of the time. And sometimes, yes, it's a very valid story, and sometimes it's not. And I want your help to address that.
Totally.
But it still takes that dual two to tango sort of concept to have the other person be receptive, because I know I've had conversations before, for example, with my sister, and I've been very calm and down, and she's been very attack and fiery. And you stay calm, and then all of a sudden you're being patronizing, and you're looking down on them, or there's this almost power dynamic that all of a sudden they think that you think that you're a better person because you're not reacting.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. All of those things do take place in relating, in exchanges. I think one of the important things to keep in mind as well, particularly, I mean, maybe this is the same for actually all relationships, is actually the motivation to which you are approaching the communication. So I know one of the techniques that I've often, it's not even a technique, it's just something that I end up saying, because I really want the other person to know my pure motivation in saying this to them. And I will say, I know, this is maybe a difficult conversation, or I hear that you're feeling judged right now, and I'm very sorry that you feel that way. I want you to know that my intention, my pure motivation in having this conversation with you is actually so that we can have a better connection. I'm very sorry that you feel judged, and I hear what you're saying, and I want you to know that I really want to have a better relationship with you. And that's why I really want to have this conversation. And sometimes that can just soften. I'm not saying it works every time, but there can be something in the softening, and that the other person can feel your vulnerability and they can actually feel you again. Because I also suspect that a lot of reactivity comes because we don't feel the other person. And here we go back into attachment wounding from childhood. We don't feel our parents because maybe they were distant, emotionally unavailable, physically unavailable, didn't give us the love that we needed. And then we have a reaction to not feeling, essentially not being able to feel the other person. And so, sometimes, again, I'm segueing back to the vulnerability piece, and this goes with the softening, that when we can feel another person, often that can, just soften us, because actually what we really want, connection is essentially feeling. And if we can't feel the other person because they've got a wall up and they're trying to be non-reactive, then that can actually cause more reactivity for that person, because they're just like, well, I just want to feel what's really going on for you.
Do you think two people with just very conflicting communication styles, and that could be from their attachment styles, like one person could be, very anxious attachment, one person could be avoidant, they have polar opposite communication styles. Is that something that can be worked on? Can a flourishing relationship, especially romantic relationship, come from that?
Oh, this is such a perfect question, such an amazing question. Thank you for asking that. My simple answer is yes. Yes.
So you're going to be like, no, absolutely not. Like, find the same communication style as you, because it's just not going to work out, and make a lot of people's lives that much easier.
Yeah, it's like
give up on it and walk away.
I guess I'm not going to say, well, if you're anxious, don't ever date an avoidant, and if you're avoidant, don't ever date an anxious. Only ever look for secure attachment. I'm never going to say that. I believe that everything is possible, and that with mature communication and with the right level of self-awareness, you can learn. Communication is a skill. It is a skill that you can master like anything else if you are motivated enough to do it. And this is where people's intention comes in, and this is where their motivation comes in. And I believe that in an intimate relationship, if two people can hold the view, their intention or motivation to become a better communicator, because I really want a deeper, more meaningful relationship with you. I essentially want to create more love. If that is the pure intention and that is the pure motivation, then if both people are willing to, become more self-aware of their feelings, essentially, and actually feel them, and then learn the language of expressing that, they most certainly can have effective communication. It is absolutely possible.
Woo, amazing.
Does it take time? Yes. Will it be effortful? Of course. Is it worth it? Absolutely.
Yeah. I find people don't actually understand that communication and the relationships do take working on, and so many people give up, or they don't want to put the effort in, or it seems too much. But I guess, you know, if somebody doesn't want to, then maybe you're not with the right partner to begin with, and that says a big deal. But, you know, from in observing some of the people around me, one of the biggest things I say is go see a counselor, go see a relationship counselor, have a mediator in there, let them tell you maybe potentially you're not listening to the other person or hearing things properly, because you can't be the therapist in the relationship if you're also part of that dyad. And I feel a lot of people, when they are potentially more conscious of communication and things like that, they will try to educate their partner onto how to communicate better, and it doesn't get received well, because then the partner thinks that they're being patronizing, and, you know, they're trying to see themselves above the other person.
Yeah.
So how can people learn how to communicate better? Where can they get these resources and work on that? Because there is this culture of feeling like if you have to see a relationship counselor, there's shame in that. You know, that means that you're recognizing that there are issues, but it shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I have a slightly different view on this one. I believe that we can generate all the resources and all the tools that we need internally for the most part. And yes, somebody can help you facilitate that, but actually all the answers are already inside. And with that, having a level of self-awareness, which is perhaps why you might go and do some personal development, why you might see a coach, why you might go to a therapist, not with the intention necessarily just that, oh, this will improve my relationship. I actually don't think that's quite the right intention. I think you're missing people will miss most of the reason why they should be doing it. The main reason is to understand one's own inner landscape, learn how to communicate with yourself, become intimate with oneself, which means essentially hearing all of the thoughts, like quietening down the noise of the mind, so you become fully aware of what am I really thinking, what are my limiting beliefs, what are the stories I'm creating, what is my preconditioning, what happened in my childhood that led me to now. And then the second part, so that's all the cognitive stuff. And then the second part of it is, how am I feeling? Actually learning how to connect to one's feelings, the inner landscape of connecting with those, understanding the sensations, and then observing your own reaction to those feelings. That level of communication with oneself, that level of awareness, that level of presence means that anyone who has that level of awareness is going to already be a better communicator, because they're going to be actually able to articulate. They're going to have the language of themselves, because that's the trouble with most people. They're trying to communicate with someone else, but they don't even understand themselves. How can you possibly understand? How can you see someone else? How can you hear someone else? How can you love someone else fully without doing that for yourself first? See yourself, hear yourself, understand yourself deeply. Then move from that place of self-understanding and self-awareness. Then you can communicate that outwardly. See, I think most people go into communication with the wrong intention, the wrong motivation. Really what they want to do is they want to prove themselves right by proving the other person wrong. It's a very combative relationship or communication style. That comes from the ego always wanting to be right. Forget being right.
I was going to say, you know, that saying, it's not you against me, it's us against the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
You spoke about language, and you also previously brought up like vulnerability. So, you know, when I asked you that question of like, when I say I get very anxious and freaked out when somebody's saying I'm fine and they're not fine, and you need to come from it from an angle of vulnerability and saying this is how it's making me feel, and not saying you're doing this and I don't like this. How do people learn that kind of language to articulate their feelings in a way to make themselves vulnerable? Is that the kind of services that you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. I think learning the language of yourself is something that I have found to be incredibly important. And it is something that I do with my clients because it's something that I learned with myself. I realized in order to become a very clean and clear communicator, the most important thing was that I learned the language of myself. And I think that you can do this through, something like, coaching. It's also, something that you do in therapy, maybe something that you do through group workshops. But at the end of the day, it's also just practice. It's just practice. We get good at what we do repetitively. And if we repetitively avoid our feelings, don't communicate our feelings, essentially are afraid of feeling and are afraid of communicating those feelings fully, not really honoring ourselves fully, not really speaking our truth fully because we're scared. We're scared of what might happen, the ramifications. If we keep doing that, then that's all we'll ever get in terms of the results that come from that very, very limited operating system.
Do you think people can almost over communicate themselves sometimes? Like in a sense of having that focus on themselves and almost projecting and saying how they are and where they're at, but not listening enough and not allowing that space?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I'm glad you raised that actually, because that is definitely a trap. Becoming essentially too self-referential. And this is also I'm going to talk about another sort of skill set, which is about empathy, because I think the first step is that you have to have this level of self-awareness. And this is where also meditation comes in, because meditation is essentially turning your eyes inside out and observing yourself. You are going to become so much more aware and so have such a deeper, more intimate relationship when you meditate every day, because there's nowhere else to go except inside. So when you first have this level of self-awareness, and then you start, practicing the communication, and you start noticing the feedback that you're maybe getting. Is this a successful communication? Is this not a successful communication? Oh, how do I communicate better? I think the third part to that, so there's a level of attunement there and noticing what's going on outside. Then there's the empathy. There's how do I become empathetic to the other person? And there is, empathy is not just a skill, but it is essentially a felt sense experience. It's really feeling where the other person is at. And I, circling back to what I was saying earlier, when we feel that the other person feels us, we generally calm down and we actually start to have a connection. And so leading with empathy, which essentially would be, I'll break that down into sort of 4 steps as well. If you were going to do empathetic listening, you would essentially be doing active listening, where you are not thinking about anything else. You are giving the other person 100% of your focused attention, firstly, and you are asking questions so that you can fully understand rather than assuming or talking over the top or interrupting. You're listening actively, very focused, not thinking about anything else, and asking them questions so you can fully get the whole picture. All right, so you're listening and you're asking questions, step 1. And then the next step is that you want to reflect back so that they know, that you've heard them, and you're going to clarify what it is that you have now heard based on, sort of paraphrasing essentially. And then you want to offer that person a level of validation. So once you have fully understood where they've come from, you are actually feeling what they're feeling. You've reflected it back to them. You've sort of paraphrased where they're at, and you've said to them, is this where it's at? Is this how you're feeling? Yes, no. And then you're going to give them the sense that you understand. And you do that by validating their experience. Because so often what happens is that in a communication, this is where a lot of miscommunication happens, we invalidate the other person's experience. When they say this is how they feel, we say, oh no, that isn't how it is. But actually that is how it is for them. That's their truth. And so, coming from that place of like, I recognize that is your truth and that is your lived experience. It might not be my truth because, when you look at a mountain, if you were standing in the east and I was standing in the west, we're both looking at the same mountain, but we're both going to have different perspectives. And they are both true.
Yeah.
So the perspective is actually relative. It's a relative perspective. But when we are showing someone else a level of empathy, we're essentially saying to them, I hear you, I see you, I understand, and I'm getting it from your perspective now. You're trying to show it to me from the east, and I'm standing in the west.
Do you think there's different communication considerations for different genders? Is there, a difference between some people maybe wanting just that validation and other people wanting a solution, or, that different response and approach?
Yeah, look, I think everybody's needs are going to be different. And I think asking the question is probably the most powerful thing to do, rather than assuming that, this person is needing validation, or this person is wanting X, Y, and Z, and maybe having a reaction to that fact, rather than having a reaction to the fact that, my God, this person needs validation again, is just asking them, what do you need? What do you need from me right now? Is there anything more that you need from me? What could I say instead? Say if you said something and they had a reaction, you could just ask them, is there something, could I have said that to you differently?
Yeah, I'm such a compulsive, here's a solution. I understand you feel that way. This is what you can do to get out of it. Whereas sometimes, and I'm slowly recognizing that all the friend needs is for you to just listen and be like, I hear you. I hear this is a hard time for you. And not, I hear this is a hard time. Go for a run. Do this for yourself. Look after yourself. Like, I don't want the solutions. I just want to be heard.
Yeah.
It's a fine skill.
It is.
Speaking of invalidation, have you ever experienced, or is there such thing as toxic communication?
Toxic communication. Well, I guess so. I mean, it's not language that I would necessarily use. I think there's healthy communication and there's unhealthy communication. And I guess that unhealthy communication can be toxic. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like, are you able to communicate in a way that translates into emotional or psychological abuse in a relationship? Because we've been speaking about how there are ways to get around all different types of communication styles, but is there ever a point when it becomes emotionally or psychologically abusive and you would just say, you know what, this is not something that can be fixed, you have to walk away from it, this is a very unhealthy communication style?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, are you kind of, just so I can clarify, talking about in individual interactions or in a relationship in general?
Both. Sometimes you're talking to someone who can be gaslighting you, completely invalidating you, and you're trying to communicate with them. And really, the best thing to do is just walk away, because it's one of those scenarios where there's no winning. And it can also happen in, long-term relationships, friendships, where you're being constantly invalidated and gaslighted.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess this is all about boundaries, our own personal boundaries, and understanding what is okay and what is not okay. And how much will I tolerate? Where is my window of tolerance, essentially? And this is where doing the inner work to understand what's okay. Where is my window of tolerance? Where are my boundaries? What's in the paddock? What's out of the paddock? Where's the gate? When do I speak up? All of those things, I think, come from, again, this level of self-awareness, doing the inner work. But essentially, if there's a boundary issue where, the other person is continuously encroaching on your boundaries in terms of gaslighting, manipulation, all of those kinds of unhealthy, and like you were saying, I guess, toxic communication styles, or, ways of essentially trying to have power over or control another person, or control the relationship dynamic. Yes, of course. Then there's the opportunity to speak up and say, this is enough. I'm not okay with this. And if you continue to communicate with me in this way, then, I won't be able to, maintain this friendship, or, this relationship isn't going to work for me if you keep doing this. And then obviously, and then that's up to the individual. Again, how much, are they willing to tolerate? And what is okay and what's not for each individual. And I think that's really where everybody has to really get to know themselves. I don't think that there's hard and fast rules about what's okay for one person versus what's not okay for someone else. I mean, obviously there's some blanket things which we could all, like physical abuse and emotional abuse. But I think a lot of these things can be quite gray, and they're not, like, they can be quite subtle, and they're not necessarily that clear. And I think this is where, getting to know yourself at a very deep level and really having strong personal boundaries and learning to speak up and say no to whoever it is, whether it's family, friends, colleagues, your boss, doesn't matter who it is, learning to stand fully in your truth and really honor yourself, irrespective of what you're worried about the outcome might be. I think moving from that place, you'll always get a good result.
It's interesting. It seems from everything that you're saying, really the first step is, as you say, to look inwards and know yourself before kind of projecting that out. How easy is it to begin to work on that path or achieve that if you're already in a relationship? Because I mean, it seems the ideal would be, I'm not going to be in a relationship. I'm going to learn me, have a relationship with myself first, and then I'm going to construct a new relationship off the foundations and the grounding of, I know who I am and this is what I'm bringing into it. So, I mean, but if you're already in a relationship, how can you navigate trying to transform whilst also, I don't know, trying to balance the two?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess if you look at relationships as an opportunity to learn about yourself, because essentially everything that happens in a relationship dynamic will be some kind of a reflection of what's going on for us inside. And we will project that out onto our partner so that we can try to resolve whatever it is. So if you see relationships more about growth and more about just developing more connection and deeper love for each other in an intimate relationship, rather than getting what I need, then the motivation is a little bit different. And so you can do them simultaneously, working on yourself and then sharing that in the relationship. Hey, this is actually what's going on for me. Like, this is what I've learned about myself. And I can see how maybe previous to me, maybe having this knowledge or awareness, actually owning maybe even some of the past behaviors that were a bit unhealthy or mean or toxic. And actually coming to that person and saying, I've actually learned something new about myself and I'm really sorry. I recognize now that the way I was communicating with you previously was, really unhelpful. And I'm really sorry about that. And what I would really like to do is, try and incorporate this new information that I'm learning about myself. So I think it's actually perfect. I think it's better. It's better to do the work while you're in a relationship, because I see a lot of people doing a lot of work on their own. And then they're like, oh my God, I'm amazing. Like, I've done all this work on myself. And then they get into a relationship and they go, oh, this is actually so much harder than I thought. It was actually so much easier being on my own.
Yeah,
Because
you get the true challenge. Yeah.
You have no triggers when you're on your own. You need the other person to trigger you. You need the other person to be the mirror, so you can actually see what's going on inside yourself. You can see the impact that you're having on another human being.
So true. Wow.
You're speaking to my heart and soul. Well, where can people find resources on communication, and where can people find you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, a couple of places that I really like in terms of resources for communication. One of them is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. That's a whole program. People can do that, but he just has it's a great book and just an amazing way of framing up. So I really like that particular style, but it's just one thing. And the main resource, I think, has to, again, just be practice. Just practice, practice, practice. And you can not only verbally communicate, but you can write things down. Journaling is an amazing practice in preparation for verbal communication, because that will actually allow you to access your thoughts, see them on paper and your feelings as well, and then think about them before you're going to articulate them. You can also just role play. This is where I do this a lot with my clients. I was like, okay, so if you were going to say that to your boss, how about we just practice doing that now? What would you say? And you can role play these kinds of things. So I think, honestly, lived experience is the best resource. It's practice, practice, practice. But also one of the other places that I do like is the Gottman Institute. They also do have a lot of great relationship resources, and they've done a lot of research. They have, some great books that John Gottman has written about relationships as well. That's always a very good resource. They're probably the ones that sort of come to mind. And in terms of getting in touch with me, was that the other part you asked me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So where can people reach you and get in touch with you?
Yeah. So you can find me at livingabravelife.com, or on Insta, which is at livingabravelife. And yeah, just you can reach out to me there, or just follow along. I do post from time to time. I'm not that good with my social media, I'll be honest.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, but they're probably the two best places.
Wonderful. And then we always wrap things up with our Holy Trinity. So if you would like to share with us a brag, a gratitude, and desire, we would love to hear it.
I feel like my brag and my gratitude are almost the same kind of thing. I was trying to think about this before I spoke to you, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to say about this. But I just recently moved to this new property, and it's like 6 acres in the Byron hinterland, and it's so beautiful. And the gardens are like, I feel like I'm living in the botanical gardens, and it's like almost a semi-dream in that way. So it's kind of, and I feel so grateful that I like get to wake up and hear the birds and see these gardens and sit in the sun and horses in the paddock and all of these kinds of things. So those two kind of go hand in hand for me.
Living the dream.
Giving the property orgasm.
I just need to ask one quick question though.
Yeah.
Did you make it out to see the lunar eclipse in Byron? I saw photos of it rise behind the lighthouse and was gobsmacked.
Yeah, I know, it was amazing. I also saw those photos and it was incredible. Yeah, that lighthouse view is amazing. I didn't get up to the lighthouse, but even just here, we're in a bit of a valley, so it's not, obviously the lighthouse is elevated, so you really get an amazing view up there. But yes, it was incredible.
Oh, okay. And your desire?
I wasn't really sure what to say about this, but one of the only desires I have right now is it's so basic. I need a new watch. I'm like, actually really like, kind of just need a new watch right now. That's like my biggest desire. It's like sort of in the background of my mind, I was like, I really need to get a watch.
Wonderful. That's very an organic response, and I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for everything you shared with us today. Brianna and I always joke about we love to give content to the listeners, but we also love to get secretly self-help from the people that we're
free therapy. Let's be real.
Self-help for the audience, self-help for us, and I feel like you've definitely answered some really needed to hear answers and questions. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been wonderful, and would love to have you on to talk about meditation one day, but we can get to that another time.
Yeah, I would definitely love to come back and talk more about that. Definitely.
Yeah, I've dabbled a little bit with Vipassana and a few different methods and whatnot, and it's close to the heart. But thank you so much for your time today, and speak soon.
Bye.
That was so wonderful to have Sarah on board and truly describe the vulnerability in living a brave life.
it was a really fun interview as well. Like she's just, I know you couldn't see her, but just her energy, her aura, like it just, you can tell she meditates every day.
Yeah.
There's just a glow of
That's calm, serenity, the skin, something in it, but an absolute knowledge base of communication. And it's lovely to see that she's applying that to the world around her, and hopefully to reach out to some of you guys as well. Please get in contact if you do. It's one of those big ones, communication. I mean, if we don't have that right, can you ever truly be happy?
Can you? I don't know. I know you can't be happy. I know you can't be happy with anybody else, but you could run away and live in the woods on your own. But that's not ideal.
We could make it work, right?
Sometimes I do want to do that because it's easier than communicating. Goodbye forever.
I'll come bring you some raw chickens every now and then.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. You've always got my back. We will link Sarah's website and Instagram in the bio. Check her out. I would love to have a session with her. So if you want to book a session with her, sounds like she can just offer endless advice. I could talk to her for hours.
So interesting to hear how much it does start with working on ourselves and the communication with ourselves before we can even try to attempt the communication in a relationship. I think that was probably my number one takeaway out of all of that, is really, it starts off with you, and then can you bring another person into that?
Yeah. There were certain points when she was speaking and it was just, I just wanted to listen forever. And, you can't do that in an interview. Eventually, you got to ask a question. But
good thing your internet was bad. And
oh, yeah. Hopefully that doesn't show up, guys. But I was about like a 10-second delay behind Brianna and Sarah. So, but there was I just wanted to listen and listen and listen. And it really does show that you have to be a full person before you can be in a healthy relationship. You can't come and hope somebody will complete you.
Well said. All right, guys, until next time. Bye.
Au revoir.
Thanks for listening to the Am I Adulting Good podcast. We hope you guys are getting out of it as much as we are and are learning a trick or two about how to adult. Please give us a review and a 5-star rating, like our podcast, and follow our channel on whichever streaming app you're using. It really helps us reach more people and build our community.
Hit us up on Instagram at Am I Adulting Good? Also, remember to send us your Holy Trinity and share your stories with us at amiadultinggood@gmail.com. Each week, we'll share one of our adulters' emails, and that could be you. Seriously, we love hearing from you. Keep doing your thing, adulters. We love you. We love you. We love you.
Am I adulting good?